Hello, everyone. Today I'm with Dan Leyland. I've known Dan for a few years now. I know Dan as a transformational program director, and often some of the areas that we talk about are either knowledge transfer or how teams that have been surrounding Dan from the client themselves have increased in capability, increased in knowledge along the way. So this whole sort of knowledge transfer piece is something I want to talk about with Dan, but I'll let Dan introduce himself. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate it. I'll give you the 60-second version. So, entrepreneurial background. I started my first business at 12. It lasted 3 weeks. Then started another one which took off at uni despite being just intended to be some beer money. That was after initially going to medical school and then deciding that wasn't the path that I wanted to take. Got into interim management a little bit by accident. So I grew the business for a while, then managed to break it. And then someone that I knew said, look, I've got a problem in my business. How about you come in and focus on the problem? I'll focus on the business. And without realizing it at the time, that was my first interim gig. And here I am 20 plus years later, having done it for quite some time now. Did first 10 years or so on a deliberate kind of zigzag journey, looking to try and build strength in depth across different business functions, sectors, geographies, things like that. And then about 10 years ago, decided, right, it's time to grow up and specialize in something, which now is M&A, integration, transformation.
Yeah, which is an area that we do a lot of work within. I was telling someone earlier, I don't know if it's a weird stat, but it's definitely a stat that we have that most clients that we work with have either been through, are going through, or about to go through M&A. So, I think I enjoy that particular part of interim management work because it's you can measure the results, you can measure how much value you're bringing to the client, and then I think that probably nicely sort of moves us into the area that we want to talk about today, which is how the team from the client becomes more upskilled, more capable, more credible even once they've been working with the career interim manager. Because I know that you're quite keen on upskilling people as you deliver the assignment objectives, but maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I can, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is something of a hobby horse of mine. So to explain it, I probably want to take a step back and explain why. So when I went off to medical school, the reason was I wanted to make a difference. And although I changed tack a little bit, that value has still stayed there. So I like to do interesting work with interesting people and make a difference.
Yeah, me too.
And the way that I go about doing that is to go into organizations and over-deliver. So, clients typically engage because they've got a problem or they've got an opportunity, a little bit like that first interim gig I mentioned. But my belief is that most organizations tend to run quite lean. And I believe that being able to change a business is as important as being able to run a business. But when you look at all the stats, they're not good. 70% of change efforts fail, similar kind of stats for M&A efforts. Value creation plans, synergies often vanish. They're just not there and people are disappointed. So that's kind of the why. But in terms of then how, I see it more as capability and confidence transfer rather than knowledge transfer. So you go in, you take a brief, which is, can you fix this or do that? And I believe that obviously you need to do what the client wants. But I think that there is a hidden value add which should be demanded rather than a pleasant surprise, which is while you're doing it, can you teach our team what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, so that next time round they've got the chance to do it for themselves rather than being reliant on a third party.
I love that. I think clients should demand that. When we put an interim manager into a client, we ask them about the objectives, what the interim needs to deliver, how they're going to measure success, all the things that you would expect from a good interim management provider. And often, if I've got a really good relationship with them, I'll say, is there anyone in the team that you want us to have a little look at who might be a future leader, but you're not quite sure, and you just kind of want them discreetly assessing? Or is there anyone that's not got the capability, or does the team capability need lifting for what you've got as part of your strat plan? And I've got to have a good relationship with the client to ask that, because I don't want them to be insulted. But at the same time, every time I ask them, their response is always absolutely. Let me have a think about that. And then they come back with all this extra agenda that the interim manager can deliver. And I communicate that to the interim manager, and their eyes start to light up. It's a really good touch point for most career interim managers that really do want to sort of pass on some of the knowledge and capability that they've learned. And I like the way that you described that. I think that was good.
Well, I think, and this isn't going to be a kind of political statement about traditional consultancies versus interim managers, more an observation, which is if you look at the structure of most of the traditional consultancies, and I've worked with quite a few, they have KPIs which include things like utilization and account margin. Yeah. Well, when you look at the behaviors that will drive, essentially it's get people off the bench. And if it's a square peg into a round hole, well, so be it, because we don't want to be having the payroll costs, but not the revenue. And then you look at the account margin and you look again at the behaviors and you think, well, doesn't this set the consultancy at odds with what's in the best interests of the clients? Whereas for me, this is what interim managers, I don't think it's just me, bring to the table, which is we want to go in there and we want to make ourselves redundant as quickly as possible whilst leaving behind a legacy of capability and confidence rather than just doing what we were asked to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think a lot of the work that we do, strangely, we don't compete with any other interim providers. I can't remember the last time we actually competed with another interim provider for a role. But we have competed with the Big Four quite a few times, and not just the Big Four, really credible companies like Alvarez and Marsal and people like that. And I think it's because we can deliver the same outcomes for the client, but we'll deliver it in a different way. Don't get me wrong, there's a time and place for the large consultancy, their brand, their heritage, they're an important part of every business as they're looking through change. But there are certain areas as well where an interim manager is often the better choice. And part of that choice is also how do we upskill our existing workforce? And how do we ensure that we don't need to bring in that particular skill set from the interim manager again? And I think you alluded to that earlier. With regard to your style and approach, then, how do you do that? How do you transfer your knowledge? How do you upskill the team that's surrounding you?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So it started out, and if I just can tell a story briefly because I think it brings it to life. So there was once a man that fell into a hole, and then first thing that happens is a priest walks past and he shouts up and he says, "Help!" And the priest writes out a prayer, throws it into the hole, and the man thinks, "Well, that's great. I appreciate the gesture, but what do I do with this?" Then a doctor walks past and he says, "Help!" The doctor writes out a prescription and throws it into the hole, and the man's perplexed again, thinking, okay, I appreciate it, but this doesn't really help me. And then his friend walks past and he shouts out, "Help!" And the friend jumps down into the hole with him. And the guy says, "What are you doing? Now we're both in here." He said, "Yeah, but I've been down here before. I know the way out." So for me, that's where the capability and confidence transfer comes in. The way that I put that into practice is I've got toolkits and methodologies that I've built. So something, the How2-Change reality check, which targets early engagement. So this is absolutely digging into the detail really rapidly. We're talking days, not weeks. Really understanding the good, the bad, the ugly, different perspectives, tapping into the knowledge and the wisdom of the organization to be able to make sure there's a full understanding of the underpinning challenges and the strategy and the outcomes so that we can make sure that we don't run before we can walk. And then I've got in-a-box toolkits, one for change, one for M&A. And the idea of those is over years, you accrue a whole load of best practices, knowledge, cheat sheets, checklists, everything.
Yeah.
So I've got all of that, and I give it to clients. People in the past have said, "Why don't you sell it?" But as an example, I spent a couple of years with a top-end FTSE 100 clients, took that in to support them with an M&A transaction, and they wanted it for all of their strategic programs. So that is now how all of the strategic programs in that division are run. And that's the kind of thing that I've done over years because it's part of the value add.
Yeah, I think it's part of the value add too. When we're speaking to permanent executives who've got a desire to come into interim management, because like you said, 20 years ago you fell into interim management. Most people fell into interim management 20 years ago. 10 years ago and up till now, it's a choice. It's a definite choice. And what I always say to executives who want to come into interim management, I always say to them, how are you progressing with building your toolkit? And most of the time they look at me and go, what? And I said that, without a toolkit, without that element of knowledge transfer, without that element of increasing the capability of the team, all you're delivering is you're just executing on a few points. I'd probably call that more contracting than interim management. I think interim management is really making a difference at board level with the people who either make decisions about or influence decisions about the balance sheet. And I think that's a very definite difference. In terms of the toolkit then, if you're sharing the toolkit, you don't mind if they continue to use that once you've left?
No, I don't.
Amazing.
In fact, there's a certain irony here because from a business model perspective, on the face of it, it doesn't make any sense. What I do is I make myself redundant, give them the knowledge, the capabilities, the confidence, and the toolkit, and then walk away knowing that the chances of repeat business are quite low. But it's more of a pay it forwards piece, and it's worked. Over the years, I think back 10 years ago, I did a piece of work. It was one of the most challenging pieces of work I'd ever done, pre-sale transformation for a private equity-backed business. But off the back of that, two of the operating partners have tapped me on the shoulder in the 10 years since and said, any chance you can come and give us a hand? We're now on the board of another company. So
Great.
At the time, you don't go back because you've solved the problem, you've given the team the ability to be able to do it themselves, but people remember.
Yeah, I think they do. We see evidence of that all the time. We've gone into many, many different sectors, industries, that we've not purposely targeted as part of our strategic plan. And it's because the people that we've helped in the past and supported in the past have moved industries and they've taken us with them. Yeah. And that probably describes how we've become sort of more industry agnostic over the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years or so, rather than what it was like in the beginning. And it's all through how you deliver for a client, how you support the client, and you make yourself redundant. And we do a very similar approach. Tell me about the knowledge transfer piece or the capability uplift piece. How do the staff view that? Because you're an outsider coming into the organization. You're an independent. You're not part of the staff. You're not part of the payroll. So how do you get them to increase their capability as an outsider?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think without being picky, I'd probably look at some of the action words in that language. So I don't think it's about getting them to do it. I think it's about enabling them to do it. So if you think, large organization, they're taking on a number of strategic initiatives, they are going to want, unless they already have one, a PMO or a transformation management office or change office, whatever you call it. They're going to need to be able to set up tools, templates, processes, methodologies, reporting, all of that stuff. If you can help them to do it, but help them to do it in such a way that it is low risk, high impacts, and they can have the credit, then why would they not be interested in that? And from a personal perspective, if I want to do interesting work with interesting people and make a difference, it puts a massive great tick in the make a difference box.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of another story which probably started a whole load of this. Credit to a guy called Rob Bacon, who was on the board of Carphone Warehouse. I worked there. And I remember him saying, what makes him tick is that he once said to people, "What do I do with the skills that I've got? How do I really make a difference?" And they said, "Look back in time and look at any given point in time, what are the biggest buildings?" It used to be that the largest buildings were the religious buildings. Now, the largest buildings are the commercial premises. If you want to make a difference, find the tallest buildings and take your skills there. And so so it's these sorts of things. And it's all of that, if you don't mind me just doing a quick plug. I've got a podcast of my own, which is not selling anything to anyone. It's really, really short, but it's passing on pieces of advice and wisdom like that in bite-sized chunks that people can digest in less than 5 minutes most of the time while they're making a cup of tea. Just finding interesting people, the single best piece of advice like that. And I think it's great that people are happy to invest their time in it.
Yeah, I must admit, in terms of the podcast, feel free to plug away, because I think things like that add real value to people. I've even bought books in the past, which have been sort of small snippets of advice that you get from people that have trodden the path before you. And I find lots of those things really inspirational. And the fact that you put those together in a podcast in like a business type environment, I think people should listen to things like that. We're definitely seeing less mentors in organizations. We're definitely seeing less people on graduate rotation programs so they can learn off lots of different people in the organization. They need to get these sort of words of wisdom from other places. And, the podcast sounds like a great idea. And also, I think it backs up what you were saying before about, there's this element of you give back as you're delivering. And I think that just cements it. So, yeah, feel free to plug away.
Well, I think there's a Steve Jobs quote of, he was often surprised, but pleasantly, that whenever he asked anyone for help, they gave it. So when I first had the idea of, I wonder whether I could take a concept of something that I've done for years over, turn up 5 minutes early for a meeting and ask people, instead of talking about the weather, ask them if they've got a single best piece of advice ever. I benefited from that. When I started thinking maybe I could broadcast it so more people could benefit, I started reaching out to people, and almost everyone said yes. I was staggered. Like the first episode was one of the SAS team that stormed the Iranian embassy and rescued 19 hostages. Next guy was former CIO of Walgreens Boots. So all of these people that are happy for nothing in it for them to just give up 15 minutes of their time to record a 5-minute episode and just push it out and help people.
Yeah, I think it shows your style and approach in terms of, as an interim manager, as you're delivering your chosen profession, you've got this element of giving back as you're doing it. And I have to say that most of the interim managers that we work with, because you're all at a senior level, they all have that part of it about them. And it's something that we don't see from big corporate consultancies. You don't see that so much from the individuals. They've got different drivers at that point in their career. But as people get to interim management and they've got a good sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 assignments under their belt, they all have this similar viewpoint. It just means that working in interim management as an interim management provider, you meet smart people, but you meet smart people that have got a definite intention to do good, and that's nice. I enjoy working in that environment. So if you were speaking to, let's say, an exec who was wanting to come into interim management, how would you describe the sort of softer skills that are needed to support that particular individual to be successful as an interim manager?
Yeah. I'm probably going to start by cherry picking one of the pieces of advice just because I think the message was really succinct and really powerful. So this was Anthony Roberts, former CIO of Walgreens Boots, and his best piece of advice was be authentic, be yourself. So I think you can't go far wrong. So if you work for a larger traditional consultancy, you can be yourself, sure, but you also have to be on brand. I think as an interim manager, you are who you are. So I think that's number one. I think the other things are always looking for opportunities to add value beyond the initial brief,
Yeah,
because usually there is an element of distress about engaging external help on an interim basis. Usually it's either a lack of capacity or some missing capability, or a here and now problem that wasn't expected, or a here and now opportunity like M&A that's come along, and the need to get it right, because a lot of people don't. So I think recognizing that that is the driver, being able to go in and say, take it as read that I'll do that, but I'm also going to keep my eyes open looking for other stuff that I can do that I think will help.
yeah.
And, how would you like to do this? Do you want me to just crack on and do it? Or do you want me to come to you and say, I think there's an opportunity here?
Yeah, that's that. I think that's a really nice way to explain it. I think also if I'm thinking about if I was an employee, and let's say I was in the finance team and you're coming in to deliver an ERP transformation, which is disruptive. As much as you want it not to be, and you're trying for it not to be disruptive, it's going to be an element of disruption there. If they see from a personality perspective that you're always looking to add value, you're very open to share your toolkit, you're very open to help people get better and to leverage from the experience that you've got, then they're much more likely to connect with you. They're much more likely to listen. They're much more likely to start adopting the changes that are inevitable. It's a really nice way to think, to go about delivering the objectives that the client needs delivered. I think the reason why we do some of these podcasts is, I think, to show that when you hire interim managers, it's not just skill set, it's what's behind it. It's culture, style, approach, capability, emotional intelligence. Are they a nice person? Do they just get it? And I think what this does in terms of, how I call it knowledge transfer, but upskilling people as you go, I think that comes across really clearly.
Yeah. I'd add a piece as well, which is it's fun. If you're doing something that you are genuinely passionate about and you can connect it to your values, then it kind of doesn't feel like work. And I think that rubs off.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely find that. I think especially on the good days, because interim management providing is up and down. But I think definitely on the good days, when you know that the interim manager that you've helped select has gone in to add some real measurable value, and it could be someone senior in the team has been thinking about leaving, but having this extra person come in and supporting them, helping them, as well as delivering objectives, is enable them to stay. It's things like that that really do make a big difference. So yeah, I completely share your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, sir. I think a lot of people have got a lot of benefit from that. And hope to see you soon.
Yeah, great.
See you later.
Thanks.
Bye.